Hello Orchid friends, welcome back to my channel. Wherever you are, I hope you're having a great day, staying healthy and staying safe. Today in this video, we're going to talk about the story behind this mini Phalaenopsis orchid. A few years ago, I went to a grocery store to look for something else, and then I came across a container or a pot with 2 orchids in it. So for the price of one, how could I pass it up, right? So I decided to put that immediately into my shopping cart. So because I have 2, I decided to do experiments. 2 exact identical orchids. Perfect for experiment, right? So that's exactly what I did. One of them did not make it, but the other one did. And then that wanted to put out a keiki, and today this orchid is that keiki. And the mother plant is eventually died off, but this keiki had been growing really strong, so I decided to keep it. Originally, I had this orchid in a 8-ounce cup, and it didn't have that many roots, so I also used quite a bit of hydrocorn, essentially expanded clay pebble as the substrate. So it was doing okay, but it wasn't doing great. I waited until it grew a little bit more root, and at the time I decided that I want to try a different growing method. So I went with moss no hole method for this orchid. And since I put this orchid in that kind of growing method, that setup, it just took off. It produced so many roots, so many leaves, and this flowering cycle is its first bloom ever. The first bloom of this orchid. Well, I guess we can still call it a seedling because it's just first time blooming, really. Because you can see it's still quite small. It's not as big as the typical mini Phalaenopsis orchid size that you see in stores. But at least it's flowering, so I'm really happy about that. In terms of care, like most of my orchids, this one gets usually anywhere between 1/4 cup and 1/8 of a cup, but more toward the 1/8 of a cup side. Because this orchid, even though it has many roots already, it is still relatively small in a 10-ounce cup, and because the moss is packed very loosely, lightly inside the cup, so I didn't want to introduce too much water. And so far, it's responding really well. It doesn't need too much water. And with fertilizer, I only give this orchid 1/4 strength as well. At the end of the month, I usually would soak this orchid. So what I do is I would just fill up the water level, pretty much 80%, and then just let it soak. Because this is in a moss no hole method, so there's no drainage hole whatsoever. So when it's done soaking, I would tilt the cup to collect the water, and I will wait until there's no dripping. But then an hour or 2 afterwards, I will return back to this orchid to check if there's any excess water at the bottom of the cup, and if there is, I continue to tilt the cup to let the water drain out until there's no dripping. That's the key. Then you can put this orchid back for another 7 to 10, maybe even up to 2 weeks, because when it's so soaking wet, and moss is really water retentive, so when it's that wet, 7-day wet dry cycle is a little hard to achieve. So I usually would just wait for another week to go by, so essentially 2 weeks, and then I would then resume the weekly watering routine. And by the way, for the water collected, for my orchids, I don't share water. For the water collected, I always collect them and bring it out to the front yard, the backyard for my outdoor plants. This orchid doesn't have any fragrance, and honestly, I bought originally I bought the orchid for because it was kind of 2 for the price of 1, or 50% off on either one of the original orchids. The color combination is okay. It's very common, orchid complex hybrid that you find in stores all the time. So this is completely common, replaceable, which is why I decided to do experiments. It doesn't have any fragrance either, but I still think this orchid has a special place in my heart because, that the keiki was produced under my care, and I was able to continue to grow it for it to become mature enough to bloom. So it's kind of rewarding in a sense, in a weird sense. Yeah, so I think this orchid is doing really well in this setup. So I think I will continue to keep it as is for another year at least, because just looking at the root amount and also the way the moss looks, I think it can still last for another year, no problem. And then if I ever do repot this orchid in a year or so, I think I may consider using a different growing method, because I'm trying to gradually phase out the use of organic media, which means bark chips or sphagnum moss. I mean, yes, there are definitely situations or places for them, but I still have a lot of inorganic substrates materials available, so I'm trying to use them up so that they're not really taking up too much space in my storage. Yeah, so next time if I repot this orchid, I think it's very likely that I will use inorganic media and probably drill holes for the container I'm using for this orchid, and just so that I can use a traditional setup with drainage holes, but in organic media, and of course plus the double cup method. If I want to soak this orchid, I can, and if I want to convert it back to a little bit like semi-hydro, I can. So there will be that flexibility there. But overall, I'm pretty happy with how this orchid did this time around. I have high hopes for this one, even though it's not fragrant. This is all I have for you today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you would like to get more orchid related videos from my channel, please subscribe and turn on the notification. I want to wish you happy growing, and I will talk to you in my next video. Ciao!